Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at a fascinating intersection today. History, deep state secrecy, modern disinformation. And it all seems to circle around some of India's most powerful political figures.
Exactly. We're diving into a whole stack of sources here, detailing alleged foreign plots. Specifically, plots potentially involving the CIA targeting major Asian leaders. And this isn't just recent history. We're talking about a timeline stretching from the mid-Cold War, the 1940s and 50s, right up to, well, basically yesterday, in terms of information warfare.
And the thread tying it all together, this recurring theme, it's what you often hear about in South Asian geopolitics. The foreign hand, the Videshi hath.
That's right. It's this deep-seated cultural and political suspicion, that whenever something major goes wrong domestically, a big political loss, a military setback, or especially the sudden death of a crucial leader, there's this assumption, almost a reflex, that it must have been orchestrated by outsiders, usually Western powers, historically.
It's a powerful narrative. And our mission today, for you listening, is really to go beyond just recounting these stories. We're taking three pivotal historical cases, these pillars of the foreign hand, belief, the unresolved fates of Subhas Chandra Bose, Lal Bahadur Shastri, and also the Chinese premier's Zhu Enlai.
And we're going to contrast those historical mysteries, these events shrouded in decades of questions, with something very current. A brand new viral conspiracy theory about an alleged assassination attempt, supposedly in 2025, targeting India's current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi.
Right, so it's historical context meeting modern digital spin.
And the key here, I think, is not just debating what factually happened or what might have happened. We're trying to understand why these narratives, whether they turn out to be grounded in some fact or pure fiction, why they gain so much traction, why they stick.
Yeah, why do they resonate so strongly in the public consciousness and in the corridors of power? They become almost a language, don't they? The way nations process their fears and strategic anxiety.
Precisely. They articulate those deep-seated feelings about vulnerability, about foreign interference, about trust, or the lack of it in international relations. It's this blurring of the lines, between maybe legitimate strategic concerns and outright political paranoia. That's the space we're exploring.
Especially when intelligence operations are involved, where secrecy is the default.
Okay,
So let's kick things off. Where's the best place to start? Probably at the beginning, right? The Cold War. Let's look at the first major documented instance that fits this pattern. An assassination plot targeting a key Asian leader, China's premier Zhu Enlai, back in 1955.
Yes, the Zhu Enlai case is crucial. It's the oldest incident on our list, and probably the one with the most established factual basis, at least regarding the attempt itself. We're talking about the sabotage of Air India Flight 300, the Kashmir Princess, on April 11th, 1955.
The Kashmir Princess. It sounds quite evocative.
It does. But the event itself was grim. The core facts show this was a genuine act of state-sponsored terrorism. It really set a dark precedent for how high-stakes espionage could play out, targeting civilian infrastructure to eliminate a political figure.
And the context here is absolutely vital, isn't it?
Yeah.
Zhu Enlai wasn't just on a holiday. He was heading somewhere very specific, very important.
Extremely important. He was flying to the Asia-Africa Conference in Bandung, Indonesia. History remembers it as the Bandung Conference, and you really can't overstate its significance at that moment in time.
Why was Bandung so critical? What was happening there?
Well, think about the world in 1955. The Cold War is really ramping up. You have the Western Bloc led by the U.S., the Eastern Bloc led by the Soviet Union, but you also have this huge wave of newly independent nations emerging from colonialism, mostly in Asia and Africa.
Right, the post-colonial era beginning in earnest.
Exactly. And Bandung was where many of these nations came together for the first time. It was the foundational moment for what would become the non-aligned movement countries, asserting their independence from both superpowers, wanting to forge their own path.
So third way, essentially.
Sort of, yes. And for the People's Republic of China, the PRC, which was still quite new, established in '49, and largely isolated internationally, certainly by the West, well, Zhu Enlai's presence at Bandung was a massive diplomatic move. It was their chance to step onto the world stage, gain legitimacy, build ties with these emerging nations, and really elevate the PRC's international standing.
Which naturally would have been seen as a major threat by certain other powers.
Oh, absolutely. Primarily by the exiled nationalist Chinese government, the Kuomintang, or KMT, led by Chiang Kai-shek, who had fled to Taiwan after losing the Civil War. They still claimed to be the legitimate government of all China and were desperate to prevent the PRC from gaining any diplomatic recognition or influence.
So for the KMT, stopping Zhu from getting to Bandung wasn't just about taking out a rival leader.
No, it was much bigger. It was about crippling a rising geopolitical force at a critical juncture. It was about derailing this entire movement of Afro-Asian solidarity that the PRC was hoping to lead or at least be a major part of. Sabotaging that flight was a strategic attack on the PRC's foreign policy ambitions.
Okay, let's get into the specifics of the plot itself. How is it carried out? You mentioned sabotage.
Yes, it was quite sophisticated, designed to look like an accident if possible. The sources confirm a time bomb was used. It was placed in the starboard wheel well of the aircraft.
The wheel well? How did they get it there?
This happened during a stopover at Hong Kong's Kai Tak airport. Kai Tak was notoriously busy. Maybe security wasn't what it is today. The KMT apparently didn't plant the bomb themselves directly. They recruited an insider.
An airport worker.
An aircraft cleaner, actually, someone who had access to the plane during servicing. Reports suggest this individual had significant gambling debts, which made them vulnerable to recruitment or coercion by KMT intelligence agents operating in Hong Kong.
A classic espionage tactic, exploiting a personal weakness.
Textbook. The bomb was timed to detonate while the plane was over the South China Sea, making recovery of evidence difficult and maximizing the chance of destroying the aircraft completely.
And it did detonate. The plane went down.
It did. Tragically, 16 people on board were killed. This included several delegates heading to Bandung, journalists covering the conference, flight crew. A terrible loss of life.
But the main target, Zhu Enlai himself, wasn't among them. He survived. How did that happen? Was it just luck?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Zhu changed his travel plans literally at the last minute. The official story put out at the time was that he had an emergency appendectomy, or perhaps just a sudden illness that forced him to delay his departure.
Appendicitis. That seems convenient.
It does. Later reports and sort of, reading between the lines of diplomatic chatter from the time suggest other possibilities. Maybe it was an illness. Maybe it was extreme caution. There have always been whispers that Zhu's security services, perhaps tipped off by friendly intelligence, maybe Soviet, maybe even British, given their presence in Hong Kong, got wind of a potential threat and advised him to change flights.
So he took a different plane.
He ended up taking a different flight, arriving in Bandung later, safely. Whether it was illness, a schedule change, or an intelligence tip, we don't know for sure. But the outcome was the same. The assassination attempt failed to get its primary target, although the human cost was still immense. But it certainly sent a chilling message about the lengths the KMT and perhaps their backers were willing to go to.
Okay, this is where we get to the core of the foreign hand narrative, right? The CIA connection. We know, or it's highly substantiated, that the KMT orchestrated this. But where does the U.S. intelligence community fit into this picture? Were they involved?
This is precisely where the documented facts start to blur into plausible suspicion, setting the template for future anxieties. The scholarly work, like Steve Tsang's research, points very firmly towards KMT planning and execution, likely run out of Taiwan with agents active in Hong Kong. That part is considered solid.
Okay.
But then you look at what came out years later in the 1970s during the U.S. Senate investigations into intelligence abuses, specifically the Church Committee hearings.
Right. The Church Committee exposed a lot of covert operations.
They did. And buried in those declassified records, or at least partially declassified records, there's evidence suggesting that the CIA around that same time, 1955, was actively considering or had even drafted plans for the assassination of a prominent East Asian leader.
An East Asian leader. Was Zhu Enlai named?
In some internal CIA discussions or planning documents from that period, the target attending a conference in 1955 is indeed identified as Zhu Enlai. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean the CIA executed the Kashmir Princess plot. They might have had their own separate plans or just been exploring options.
So we don't have, like, a memo saying CIA tells KMT agent Chan to plant bomb. There's no smoking gun document proving direct operational command of this specific plot.
Not publicly available, no. There's no declassified cable that says Operation Kashmir Princess approved, Langley. So the KMT's direct role is substantiated fact. The extent of the CIA's direct operational involvement in this specific bombing remains plausible, given their known activities and attitudes at the time, but it's not definitively proven with public evidence.
But plausible is often enough, isn't it? Especially in that Cold War climate.
It's more than enough to fuel suspicion. Think about it. The U.S. was providing massive amounts of aid, military, financial, intelligence support to the KMT government in Taiwan. They saw Taiwan as a crucial bulwark against communist China. So when the KMT carries out a sophisticated, high-profile assassination attempt against the PRC premier,
It's hard for people in the region, especially those wary of U.S. influence, not to assume there was at least some level of American awareness or tacit approval or perhaps even enabling, right?
yeah, exactly. Even if the CIA didn't directly order or manage the bombing, the very fact that they were contemplating assassinating the same target at the same time, combined with their close relationship with the KMT, creates this powerful perception of collusion. And that perception, that ambiguity, is absolutely critical. It lays the historical groundwork. It makes future claims of CIA plots, like the ones we'll discuss later regarding India, seem much more believable to populations already primed for suspicion.
It establishes the precedent in the public mind.
Precisely.
Mhm.
The foreign hand wasn't just paranoia. Here was a case where a foreign-backed group did try to assassinate a major Asian leader. The only question was how far up the chain the ultimate responsibility went.
And interestingly, India got pulled into the aftermath of this directly, didn't it? Through the investigation.
Yes, that's a significant side note. Since it was an Air India plane, India had a direct stake in finding out what happened. The investigation became an early important test for India's own intelligence capabilities, which were still developing in the post-independence era.
Who led the investigation from India's side?
A name that would become legendary in Indian intelligence circles. R.N. Kao. He wasn't head of RAW, yet RAW wouldn't be formed until 1968, but he was a key figure in the Intelligence Bureau, IB, at the time. Kao led the Indian part of a joint investigation.
Chat with him.
With the Chinese authorities, understandably, as their premier was the target, and also with the British, because the bombing happened in British-controlled Hong Kong. It was quite a complex, multinational effort.
And were they successful? Did they figure out who did it?
They were. Their combined efforts, intelligence sharing, and detective work successfully identified the KMT network responsible for planning the attack, recruiting the airport cleaner in Hong Kong. They exposed the agents involved.
So this wasn't just a tragedy for India losing the plane and crew, but also a formative experience for its intelligence apparatus.
Absolutely. It gave India direct high-level experience in investigating international state-sponsored terrorism and espionage. It showed India could operate effectively alongside major powers like China and Britain in complex counterintelligence operations. And perhaps crucially, it gave Indian intelligence first-hand insight into the ruthless methods being employed in the Cold War's shadow conflicts right there in Asia. This experience would undoubtedly have shaped their worldview and preparedness later on.
That direct insight, that confirmation of how these things could happen, sets the stage perfectly, albeit tragically, for the next case. If the zoo plot was a near miss, an attempt that failed to get its main target, the death of India's second prime minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri, remains for many, as you said, the country's most enduring successful mystery.
Yes, the Tashkent tragedy. It casts such a long shadow. We're talking about an event that occurred over 55 years ago, January 1966, and it still evokes incredibly strong emotions and deep suspicion in India. It fundamentally altered the course of India's post-Nehru political trajectory and embedded this sense of external vulnerability right at the heart of the state.
Let's set the scene. Tashkent, Uzbekistan, then part of the Soviet Union. Why was Shastri there?
Shastri was there for a crucial peace summit. He was meeting with Pakistan's president, Ayub Khan. This was immediately after the 1965 India-Pakistan War, a short but intense conflict. The Soviet Union, under Premier Alexei Kosygin, was playing the mediator, trying to broker a ceasefire and a return to normalized relations between the two South Asian rivals.
So a high-pressure diplomatic environment.
Extremely high pressure. The war had been costly for both sides. Shastri was seen in India as having led the country decisively, restoring national pride after the 1962 conflict with China. He arrived in Tashkent having successfully defended India's interests on the battlefield.
And the summit was successful. They reached an agreement.
Yes, after intense negotiations, they signed the Tashkent Declaration on January 10, 1966. It essentially called for a return to the status quo antebellum, renunciation of force, and withdrawal of troops back to pre-war positions. It was hailed as a major diplomatic achievement brokered by the Soviets.
Shastri must have been relieved, maybe exhausted, but triumphant.
One would assume so. He had navigated India through a war and then secured a peace agreement, albeit one that involved making some concessions that weren't universally popular back home. He was seen as a man of great integrity, a humble leader thrust into immense responsibility after Nehru's death in '64. He was really at the peak of his influence.
And then, just hours after signing this historic declaration,
he died. Suddenly, unexpectedly, in the early hours of January 11th, around 1:20 or 1:30 a.m. local time, in the dacha where he was staying.
What was the official cause of death given at the time?
The official account, provided by the Soviet doctors attending to him and subsequently accepted by the Indian government delegation present, including his accompanying physician, Dr. R.N. Chu, was a massive heart attack, a myocardial infarction.
He had a history of heart problems, didn't he?
He did. He had suffered previous heart attacks, one in 1959 and possibly another minor one more recently. So, on the surface, dying of a heart attack under extreme stress after concluding intense negotiations, it wasn't entirely implausible medically.
But there's always a but in these stories, isn't there?
There's a huge but. The circumstances immediately surrounding his death, and especially what happened when his body was returned to India, were anything but straightforward. They instantly ignited doubts that have never gone away.
This is where the family's testimony becomes crucial. What did they observe when his body arrived back in Delhi? What specifically made them reject the heart attack narrative?
Their observations were shocking and became public knowledge very quickly. His wife, Lalita Devi, was adamant from the moment she saw the body. She famously declared, "My husband did not die a natural death. He has been murdered." And this wasn't just an expression of grief. She and other family members, including his sons, pointed to specific physical signs they saw on the body.
What kind of signs?
They described extensive bluish or purplish patches on his skin, particularly on his face and neck. This suggests cyanosis, which can indicate a lack of oxygen, something potentially consistent with certain types of poisoning or suffocation, not typically a primary sign of a standard heart attack.
Bluish patches. Okay. What else?
They also reported significant swelling of the body, more than might be expected. And most disturbingly, they talked about seeing distinct cuts or marks on his abdomen and neck. Leda Devi specifically mentioned a cut mark on his stomach from which blood appeared to be oozing, and another mark on his neck.
Cuts. That's completely inconsistent with a heart attack.
Completely. Now, some later tried to explain these away, perhaps embalming artifacts, though the Soviets claimed no embalming was done beyond basic preservation, or maybe marks from medical procedures during the emergency response. But the family was convinced these were signs of foul play, possibly indicating a struggle or an attempt to introduce poison.
So you have the family, the people closest to him, immediately crying foul based on visible evidence on the body itself. How did the authorities respond to these specific concerns?
This is where the story becomes even more suspicious, fueling the conspiracy theories for decades. The official response was, essentially, to stick to the heart attack story, and crucially, to avoid any procedure that could have confirmed or denied the family's observations.
You mean no autopsy?
Exactly. The single most critical failure, the one that guarantees this mystery will likely never be solved definitively, is that no post-mortem examination was ever conducted. Not in Tashkent, where he died under Soviet jurisdiction, and incredibly, not even after the body was flown back to India and received by his own government.
Why on earth not? A prime minister dies suddenly in a foreign country under suspicious circumstances reported by his family, and there's no autopsy. That seems almost deliberate.
It seems inexplicable, doesn't it? The official reasons given were varied and, frankly, weak. Suggestions were made about respecting the family's wishes, though Lalita Devi later demanded an inquiry, or about the diplomatic sensitivities of questioning the Soviet account, or even that it was simply assumed to be a heart attack given his history. But none of these really hold water under scrutiny. The lack of an autopsy is the central pillar supporting the foul play theory. It denied any chance to medically verify the cause of death or investigate the strange marks the family saw.
Okay, no autopsy. What other evidence, or lack thereof, added fuel to the fire? You mentioned his personal doctor, Dr. Chu.
Yes, Dr. R.N. Chu. His role, or lack thereof, at the critical moment is another point of contention. He was part of Shastri's official delegation, his personal physician. Yet, according to some accounts, he wasn't immediately present when Shastri first felt unwell or collapsed. There were delays in reaching him, or confusion about who was attending to the PM initially.
And what about his records? Did he keep notes on Shastri's health during the trip?
That's another missing piece. Shastri's personal diary or notes from the Tashkent trip reportedly disappeared, and Dr. Chu's own notes or log detailing the Prime Minister's condition in the hours leading up to his death also vanished or were never produced. This lack of contemporary medical documentation is another glaring gap.
So, no autopsy, missing notes.
Sure.
And then there's the fate of Dr. Chu himself years later. This part is particularly chilling.
It is. Years passed, and the controversy refused to die down. Parliamentary questions were asked, and eventually a committee was formed, informally at least, to look into the circumstances. Dr. Chu, as the key medical witness, was scheduled to testify before this parliamentary committee. And just before he was due to appear, he, along with his wife and daughter, were killed in a road accident. A truck collided with their car.
Killed in a car accident right before testifying about the suspicious death of a prime minister.
Precisely. Now, accidents happen, of course, but the timing was, to put it mildly, incredibly suspicious. It fed the narrative that powerful forces were determined to silence anyone who might shed light on what really happened in Tashkent. The death of Dr. Tu cemented the belief for many that Shastri's death was not natural and was followed by a ruthless cover-up.
It's an accumulation of anomalies, isn't it? The body's condition, no autopsy, missing records, the key witness dying mysteriously. It paints a very disturbing picture.
It really does. You don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to find this sequence of events deeply unsettling and demanding of explanation.
Okay, let's talk motive. If we entertain the assassination theory, who would want Shastri dead and why? This is where the geopolitical angle, specifically India's nuclear program, comes in, right?
Absolutely. The timing, again, is critical. Just before going to Tashkent, or certainly in the period leading up to it, Shastri's government had made a hugely significant decision regarding India's nuclear ambitions.
What was that decision?
He had given the green light, essentially, to Dr. Homi J. Bhabha, the architect of India's atomic energy program, to accelerate research towards nuclear capability. Now, India always maintained its program was for peaceful purposes, but the 1965 war with Pakistan had significantly heightened security concerns. Bhabha himself was advocating strongly for developing the capacity for peaceful nuclear explosions, or PNEs.
PNEs, which the rest of the world saw as a clear step towards building nuclear weapons.
Exactly. Developing a PNE capability is virtually indistinguishable, technologically, from developing a bomb. So India under Shastri appeared to be on the threshold of becoming a nuclear power. This was happening just as the major powers, particularly the US and USSR, were trying to establish the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT regime, to prevent more countries from getting the bomb.
So India going nuclear would have upset the global strategic balance they were trying to maintain.
Tremendously, especially for the United States. India, under Nehru and Shastri, was officially non-aligned, but it had reasonably close ties with the Soviet Union, particularly in defense procurement. And India, with nuclear weapons, potentially leaning towards the Soviet sphere, was a major concern for Washington during the peak of the Cold War.
And there's also the context of the 1965 war itself. Shastri had defied U.S. pressure during that conflict, hadn't he?
He had. The U.S., under President Lyndon B. Johnson, had tried to use its leverage, particularly food aid, under the PL-480 program, which India was heavily reliant on at the time to pressure India. Shastri resisted this pressure. Moreover, India had fought the war largely against U.S.-supplied Pakistani weaponry and had, in the eyes of many, effectively won, or at least fought Pakistan to a standstill, humiliating a key U.S. ally in the region.
So from a hard-nosed geopolitical perspective, the U.S. might have seen Shastri as problematic. Someone who was defying them, cozying up to the Soviets, leading India towards nuclear capability, and embarrassing their ally Pakistan.
That's the core of the CIA assassination theory, often linked to controversial figures like Gregory Douglas, who claimed access to intelligence insiders. The theory posits that the CIA, possibly acting with elements within Pakistan's ISI or other anti-Indian forces, saw Shastri as a major obstacle to U.S. strategic interests in South Asia. Removing him could potentially achieve several goals: halt or delay the nuclear program, install a more pliable leadership in Delhi, weaken Soviet influence, and restore the regional balance more favorable to Pakistan and the U.S.
It's a compelling if frightening motive. And then comes the second, devastating coincidence that seems to cement this theory for many people.
Yes, the death of Dr. Homi Bhabha. The timing is just staggering. Shastri dies on January 11th, 1966. Barely 2 weeks later, on January 24th, 1966, Homi Bhabha, the man tasked with building India's nuclear capability, is killed.
How did Bhabha die?
He died in a plane crash. Air India Flight 101, flying from Bombay to New York via Geneva, crashed into Mont Blanc in the French Alps. Everyone on board was killed.
So within the space of 14 days, the prime minister, who reportedly authorized accelerated nuclear research, and the chief scientist capable of executing that research are both dead in sudden, dramatic circumstances. One allegedly of a heart attack amid suspicious signs, the other in a plane crash on a clear day.
You can see why this sequence of events became the absolute bedrock of the four-in-hand theory regarding Shastri's death. The coincidence seemed too enormous, too strategically convenient for India's rivals to be mere chance. The two men who held the keys to India's nuclear future were eliminated almost simultaneously.
Were there ever any serious investigations into the Bafo plane crash suggesting sabotage?
There have been persistent theories, of course, claims about bombs on board or even that the plane was shot down. Some point to the recovery, decades later, of wreckage that might hint at an explosion. But officially, the cause was determined to be controlled flight into terrain, basically. Pilot error or navigational issues causing the plane to fly into the mountain in cloudy conditions. However, like with Shastri, the sheer geopolitical implications have kept the sabotage theories alive, often linking it back to the same alleged plot to stop India's nuclear program.
The deaths of Shastri and Paba together create this perfect storm of suspicion.
A perfect storm. It provides a clear motive, stopping the nuclear program, a potential perpetrator, the CIA or Western intelligence, and a sequence of events that seems too coincidental to ignore. Even if you discount the more lurid details, the elimination of these two key figures in such short succession undeniably had a profound impact on India's strategic trajectory.
Now let's circle back to the government's role in perpetuating this mystery, the secrecy around the Tashkent files. This seems almost as damaging as the initial lack of autopsy.
It's arguably the primary reason the conspiracy theories remain so potent today. If the government had been transparent from the start, or even later, perhaps the narrative could have been managed. But the persistent refusal to declassify the relevant documents is seen by many as proof of a cover-up.
We're talking about files held by the Prime Minister's office, PMO, and possibly the Ministry of External Affairs, MEA. People have tried to access these using India's Right to Information Act, haven't they?
Yes, numerous RTI applications have been filed over the years, specifically asking for the Tashkent files documents relating to Shastri's death, the investigation, such as it was, diplomatic cables from the time, etc.
And what has the official response been?
The government, across different political parties being in power, has consistently refused to declassify the core documents. In 2009, for instance, the PMO formally acknowledged that it held one classified document relating to Shastri's death, but refused to release it.
On what grounds? What justification did they give for keeping a file about a 1966 event secret in 2009 or even today?
They invoked Section 8 of the RTI Act. This is a standard exemption clause used across many countries' freedom of information laws. It allows the government to withhold information if its disclosure would prejudicially affect the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security, strategic, scientific, or economic interests of the state, relation with foreign state, or lead to incitement of an offense.
Okay, let's break that down. They're claiming releasing this file, even decades later, could harm national security or damage relations with the foreign state.
That's the official justification. The implication is that the files contain information so sensitive that making it public could genuinely hurt India's interests, or more likely, severely damage diplomatic ties with another country.
Which foreign state are we likely talking about here? Given the location, it must be Russia or perhaps Uzbekistan.
That's the general assumption. Revealing the full details might embarrass Russia as the successor state to the Soviet Union, perhaps exposing negligence, incompetence, or even darker secrets about what happened on their soil under their watch. Or it could implicate individuals or agencies in Uzbekistan. Or, if the assassination theories hold any water, it could point towards involvement by other powers that India might not want to antagonize publicly even today.
But doesn't this refusal have the opposite effect? By claiming these nearly 60-year-old files are still too sensitive for national security, aren't they basically telling the public, yes, there is something explosive in here, something we don't want you to know?
That is precisely the impact. The secrecy becomes self-defeating if the goal is to quell suspicion. It creates an information vacuum that the public naturally fills with the most dramatic or sinister explanation, which is usually the assassination theory. If the files merely detailed, say, Soviet medical incompetence or frantic diplomatic maneuvering to avoid embarrassment, releasing them, while perhaps causing temporary diplomatic awkwardness, would likely do far less long-term damage than allowing the murdered prime minister narrative to fester indefinitely.
So the state's attempt to protect itself or its relationships through secrecy actually ends up undermining public trust and feeding the very conspiracy it might wish to dispel.
Absolutely. It's a classic dilemma. The persistent opacity guarantees that the narrative of foreign treachery, the Videshi Hath, remains not just believable, but actively supported by the government's own actions, or lack thereof. Until those files are opened, the ghost of Tashkent will continue to haunt India's perception of its place in the world and its relationship with external powers.
It's a story where the cover-up, or perceived cover-up, becomes almost more significant than the original event.
In many ways, yes. The handling of the aftermath is what keeps the wound open. And the family, particularly Shastri's sons, continued to campaign for decades for a proper inquiry, for the release of documents, for closure, largely without success. Political expediency, it seems, has always favored letting the mystery remain unresolved.
An unresolved mystery that perfectly feeds the foreign hand narrative. Okay, let's shift gears now. We move from a death shrouded in secrecy and suspicious circumstance to something even more fundamental. A disappearance that became a national myth, defying not just one but multiple official attempts at closure. We're talking about Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose.
Ah, Bose. If Shastri represents the unresolved trauma of potential Cold War assassination, Bose embodies something deeper, perhaps. He's the symbol of uncompromising revolutionary spirit, the leader who broke with Gandhi and Nehru, allied with the Axis powers during World War II, all in the pursuit of India's freedom. His story challenges the neat narratives of India's independence movement.
And the official story of his death just never resonated with the public, did it? It felt anticlimactic, almost unworthy of his stature.
Completely. Accepting that this larger-than-life figure who commanded the Indian National Army, INA, and hobnobbed with Hitler and Tojo, simply died in a mundane plane crash. It felt wrong to many. It felt like a narrative convenient for the post-war powers, both the victorious allies and perhaps even the new Indian government, which had complex feelings about Bose's legacy.
So let's lay out that official story first, the one that was maintained for decades, based largely on Japanese and INA accounts. What supposedly happened?
The official account states that Subhas Chandra Bose died on August 18, 1945. This was just days after Japan's surrender ended World War II. Bose was in Southeast Asia, reportedly trying to get to Manchuria, which was then being occupied by the Soviet Red Army.
Why Manchuria? Why head towards the Soviets?
Bose's strategy had always been pragmatic, if controversial. He believed in seeking help from Britain's enemies. With the Axis defeated, he saw the Soviet Union as the next potential ally against British imperialism. His plan, it seems, was to reach Soviet territory and negotiate for support for India's independence struggle, perhaps offering his INA soldiers or intelligence in return.
Okay, so he's trying to reach Soviet-controlled territory. How does the plane crash fit in?
According to the official version, he boarded a Japanese military transport plane, often described as an overloaded Mitsubishi Kai-21 heavy bomber in Saigon, heading north. The plane stopped to refuel at Taihoku Airfield in Formosa, which is now Taipei, Taiwan. Shortly after takeoff from Taihoku as August 18th, the plane allegedly developed engine trouble, crashed, and burst into flames.
And Bose was on board and injured.
Yes. The key witnesses who survived the crash were his aide-de-camp, Colonel Habibur Rahman, who was traveling with him, and several Japanese military personnel. Their testimony formed the basis of the official account. They stated that Bose suffered severe third-degree burns covering most of his body, but was conscious initially.
Who confirmed his death?
The primary confirmation came from Colonel Rahman and the Japanese military doctor, Dr. Yoshimi Tanayoshi, who treated him at the Nanmon Military Hospital near the airfield. They testified that Bose died from his injuries several hours later, that same evening. His body was supposedly cremated shortly thereafter due to the conditions and lack of embalming facilities.
And the ashes.
His purported ashes were collected and eventually transported to Tokyo, where they remain enshrined at the Rinpoche Temple. This temple has become a site of pilgrimage, but also a focal point of the controversy, as many refuse to believe the ashes are genuinely his.
Okay, so that's the official narrative. Plane crash in Taiwan, death from burns, cremation, ashes in Tokyo. It sounds detailed. Why the immediate and profound skepticism in India?
The skepticism was immediate and widespread for several reasons. First, the lack of independent verification. The crash occurred in chaotic, immediate post-war conditions. There was no proper Allied investigation team on the scene quickly. The British and American intelligence were initially suspicious themselves, considering the possibility that Bose might have faked his death to escape capture.
So even the Allies weren't immediately convinced.
No, there were internal memos questioning the story early on. Second, the physical evidence was scant or contested. There are conflicting accounts about the exact location of the crash, the nature of the wreckage. Crucially, there was no body for positive identification or forensic examination. All they had were the ashes and the testimony of Rahman and the Japanese personnel.
And Colonel Rahman's testimony, while consistent, was from someone deeply loyal to Bose, perhaps under pressure from the Japanese initially.
That was certainly argued. Could he have been part of a plan to help Bose disappear? Or was he simply relaying what he believed happened? His consistency over the years led many to believe him, but the doubt always lingered. Furthermore, the whole scenario, Bose heading towards the Soviets, made a cover-up seem strategically plausible. Maybe the crash was faked to allow him to reach Soviet territory undetected.
Right, which leads directly into the major alternative theories that captured the public imagination. What were the main ones suggesting he survived?
They generally fall into two broad categories, though with many variations. The first is the geopolitical survival theory, focusing on the Soviet Union.
The Soviet detention theory.
Exactly. This theory argues that the plane crash either never happened or was a deliberately staged event. Bose, according to this line of thought, successfully reached Manchuria, or perhaps Deren, was apprehended by the advancing Soviet Red Army, or the NKVD, Soviet intelligence. What happened next is debated within the theory. Was he imprisoned in a gulag in Siberia? Was he held for negotiations? Was he eventually executed by Stalin's regime, perhaps because he knew too much or was deemed politically inconvenient?
What's the appeal of this theory?
Its appeal lies in its strategic logic. It fits Bose's known plan to seek Soviet help. It explains the lack of a verifiable crash site or body, and it implies a massive cover-up involving not just the Japanese, but potentially the Soviets, the British, who wanted him captured, and even India's post-independence government under Nehru, who might have seen Bose's return as politically destabilizing. This theory requires a high-level, multinational conspiracy of silence.
Okay, that's the hard geopolitical theory. What's the other major line of speculation, the
Yeah.
more mystical one?
That would be the Gumnami Baba theory, sometimes called the Bhagwanji theory. This is perhaps the most enduring and emotionally resonant alternative narrative within India itself. It posits that Bose didn't die, didn't end up in a Soviet prison, but actually returned to India secretly and lived incognito for decades.
As a hermit, a holy man.
Precisely. As a reclusive sadhu, or holy man, known as Gumnami Baba, meaning nameless saint or saint in anonymity, primarily in the town of Faizabad, near Ayodhya in Uttar Pradesh. This mysterious figure lived in seclusion from the 1950s or 60s until his death in 1985.
And why did people believe this recluse was Bose? What was the evidence?
The followers of this theory pointed to several things. The Baba was reportedly highly educated, fluent in several languages, including Bengali, Hindi, and English. Some even claimed German. He maintained correspondence with people knowledgeable about international affairs. Crucially, after his death, a large number of trunks were recovered from his dwelling.
Trunks containing what?
Containing a trove of intriguing items. Numerous books on history, politics, and international relations, maps of India and Asia, foreign cigars, and items that seemed personally linked to Bose, such as family photographs, letters allegedly addressed to him, round-rimmed spectacles similar to those Bose wore, and even purported Indian National Army, INA memorabilia.
That does sound compelling, if circumstantial.
Yeah.
A highly knowledgeable recluse with Bose-like possessions.
It was incredibly compelling for many. It offered this romantic vision of the revolutionary hero living out his days in secret, perhaps guiding events from the shadows, or simply waiting for the right time to reveal himself. It tapped into a deep desire to believe that Netaji hadn't just vanished or died meaninglessly.
Was there ever any scientific attempt to verify the Gumnami Baba link? DNA testing?
Yes, eventually. After years of demands by believers, court orders led to the preservation of items belonging to Gumnami Baba. In 2016, DNA samples extracted from the Baba's teeth were compared with DNA samples from Bose's known relatives. The results, according to the forensic report submitted to the Allahabad High Court, did not match. The DNA profile obtained from the teeth was inconsistent with the Bose family lineage.
So scientifically, Gumnami Baba was not Subhas Chandra Bose.
According to that specific DNA test, no. Of course, some proponents of the theory question the methodology or the chain of custody of the samples, as often happens when cherished beliefs are challenged by forensic evidence. But the official scientific finding rejected the link. Despite this, the emotional hold of the Gumnami Baba story remains potent for a significant number of people. It speaks volumes about the need for a more satisfying end to Bose's story than the official one.
It really does. Now, what makes the Bose mystery particularly fascinating and frankly damaging to state credibility is the history of official inquiries. India set up not one, not two, but three major commissions to investigate Bose's fate. And instead of settling the matter, they ended up contradicting each other.
This is where the official narrative truly begins to fray and where the suspicion of a deliberate government cover-up solidifies in the public mind. 3 inquiries spanning decades yield conflicting results. It's almost tailor-made to breed conspiracy theories.
Okay, let's quickly run through them. The first one.
The first was the Shahnawaz Committee, set up in 1956 under Prime Minister Nehru. It was headed by Shahnawaz Khan, who had been a general in Bose's INA. The committee interviewed witnesses in India, Japan, and elsewhere.
And its conclusion.
It largely affirmed the official story. Based primarily on the testimony of Colonel Habibur Rahman and the Japanese witnesses, the committee concluded that Bose had indeed died in the plane crash in Taihoku on August 18, 1945.
Was this accepted?
Not universally, not even within the committee itself. One member, Suresh Chandra Bose, who was Netaji's elder brother, refused to sign the report. He submitted a dissenting opinion, arguing that the investigation was flawed, that key witnesses weren't interviewed, and that Nehru's government seemed predisposed to confirming the death theory. His dissent was a major blow to the committee's credibility right from the start.
Okay, so the first attempt fails to achieve consensus. What about the second inquiry?
The second was the Khosla Commission, established in 1970 under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. It was a one-man commission headed by Justice G.D. Khosla. It essentially re-examined the evidence considered by the Shahnawaz Committee and interviewed some additional witnesses.
And its findings.
It reached the same conclusion as the Shahnawaz Committee. Justice Khosla affirmed the plane crash theory, upheld the testimony of Rahman and the Japanese witnesses, and dismissed the alternative theories as baseless speculation. So, for the government, the matter was considered closed again.
But the public doubts persisted, didn't they? Leading to a third, much later inquiry.
They absolutely persisted, fueled by ongoing research by independent investigators, books, and public campaigns. The pressure eventually led the government, this time under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, from the BJP, a party often more sympathetic to Bose's legacy, to establish a third inquiry in 1999. This was the Mukherjee Commission, headed by retired Supreme Court Justice Manoy Kumar Mukherjee.
And this commission took a very different approach, didn't it?
Radically different. Justice Mukherjee conducted what many consider the most thorough investigation yet. He traveled extensively, examined documents in multiple countries, including Russia and Taiwan, and critically reevaluated all the previous evidence. He spent 6 years on the task.
And what was his conclusion? This is a crucial part.
His conclusion, submitted in his report in 2005, was explosive. Justice Mukherjee definitively rejected the plane crash theory. He concluded that Subhas Chandra Bose did not die in Taihoku in August 1945.
He rejected it entirely. On what basis?
His key finding, the one that completely undercut the previous 2 commissions, came from direct communication with the government of Taiwan. He formally requested records regarding any air crash at Taihoku Airport on or around August 18, 1945. The Taiwanese government officially responded that they had no record of any such plane crash occurring during that period.
Wow, so the government of the country where the crash supposedly happened says it didn't happen.
Precisely. No official record of a crash, no record of casualties matching Bose or the Japanese officers, no hospital admission records corresponding to the official story. Justice Mukherjee concluded that the entire plane crash narrative was likely a fabrication, possibly a deliberate ploy, perhaps orchestrated by Bose himself or the Japanese to allow him to escape.
This finding seems monumental. It's the strongest official evidence directly contradicting the decades-long government stance. How did the Indian government react to the Mukherjee Commission report?
In a move that stunned many and reignited the cover-up theories, the UPA government, which had come to power by then under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, officially rejected the Mukherjee Commission's findings in Parliament in May 2006.
They rejected it. After commissioning the inquiry themselves, or rather the previous government did, what was their reasoning?
Their official reasoning was somewhat convoluted. They accepted Mukherjee's finding that there was no conclusive proof of the plane crash, largely due to the Taiwan evidence. However, they argued that the commission had failed to provide definitive, irrefutable proof of the alternative, i.e. where Bose did go or what did happen to him. They specifically criticized his leaning towards the Soviet detention theory, or the Gumnami Baba angle, as lacking concrete evidence.
So basically, you proved the old story wrong, but you didn't definitively prove a new story right, so we're rejecting your main conclusion.
That's essentially how it was perceived. The government effectively chose to ignore the Commission's most significant finding, the lack of a plane crash, and by doing so, implicitly reverted to the older, discredited narrative, or at least left the whole matter in a state of official limbo.
The cycle secrecy, inquiry affirming the official story, dissent, more secrecy, another inquiry affirming it, more dissent, a third inquiry disproving it, and then the government rejecting that disproof. It seems almost designed to ensure the mystery never dies.
It certainly guarantees it. The government's handling of the Mukherjee report, in particular, cemented the belief for many that there is something about Bose's fate that successive Indian governments, regardless of political ideology, desperately want to keep hidden. Whether it's embarrassment about his Axis collaboration, complex dealings with the Soviets, or something else entirely, the secrecy fuels endless speculation.
And the declassification of files more recently hasn't really cleared things up, has it?
Starting in 2016, the Modi government did begin declassifying thousands of previously secret files related to Bose, held by the PMO, MEA, and intelligence agencies. This fulfilled a long-standing demand. However, while the files revealed fascinating details about surveillance of Bose's family for decades, diplomatic communications, and internal government discussions, they didn't contain a single smoking gun document definitively stating Bose died here or Bose lived here. The core mystery remained unsolved, though the declassification itself acknowledged the legitimacy of the public's questions.
So the Bose mystery endures, fundamentally, because the official story feels inadequate for the man, and the government's own actions over decades have created a deep distrust around its willingness to reveal the full truth.
Exactly. He embodied uncompromising courage, a revolutionary path. Accepting a quiet, accidental death just doesn't fit that image. And when official inquiries contradict each other and governments reject findings that challenge the status quo, the narrative of survival, betrayal, and hidden truths becomes not just appealing, but logical in the face of state opacity. The ghost of Netaji remains unexorcised.
Okay, we've journeyed through the Cold War shadows with Zhu Enlai, wrestled with the enduring trauma of Tashkent and Lal Bahadur Shastri, and explored the multi-layered myth surrounding Subhash Chandra Bose. Decades of history shaped by potential foreign interference, government secrecy, and profound national anxieties. Now we need to make a sharp turn right into the present day.
Yes, we shift from these historical mysteries, often defined by a lack of information or deliberate withholding of it, to a modern scenario characterized by an overload of information, or rather, disinformation. We're moving from the archives of Taihoku and Tashkent to the digital battlefields of the 21st century.
And we're looking at how those same old anxieties, that same Videshi Hath narrative, manifests now in the age of social media, hybrid warfare, and, well, deepfake's just around the corner.
Precisely. We're examining the most recent case detailed in our sources. A sensational, viral claim about a failed assassination attempt allegedly backed by the CIA against India's current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi.
And this supposedly happened during a major international summit.
Yes, the story, which gained massive traction globally in late 2025, alleges that the plot was set to take place during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, summit. The specific time frame mentioned in these viral reports was around August 31st to September 1st, 2025, during the SCO meeting held in Tianjin, China.
An SCO summit in China involving leaders from Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Central Asian states.
Yeah.
That's already a high-stakes environment. And the story adds a layer of extreme spy thriller drama onto it.
Oh, completely. The narrative that spread online reads like something straight out of a Tom Clancy novel, or maybe a Jason Bourne script. It's a masterclass in crafting modern disinformation because it weaves together plausible geopolitical tensions with entirely unsubstantiated but very dramatic intelligence claims.
Okay, walk us through the key elements of this alleged plot, according to the viral story. What was the supposed goal?
The narrative framed it as a classic CIA destabilization operation. The alleged objective was to assassinate Prime Minister Modi. Why? To remove a leader who is seen as successfully balancing India's relationships between the West, particularly the US, Russia, and China. The goal, according to this narrative, was to replace him with a more overtly pro-Western regime in India.
And the strategic aim of that would be?
To fundamentally disrupt India's strategic autonomy, to pull India firmly into the Western camp, thereby weakening alternative power blocs like BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the SCO itself, essentially to halt India's rise as an independent global player navigating a multipolar world.
Okay, so that's the alleged motive. High-stakes geopolitics. How is the plot supposedly foiled? This is where other major powers come in, according to the story.
Exactly. The narrative claims the assassination attempt was thwarted by a remarkable, highly secret joint counterintelligence operation. And get this, it supposedly involved India's own research and analysis wing, working hand in glove with Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB, and China's Ministry of State Security, MSS.
RA, FSB, and MSS working together. India, Russia, and China collaborating to stop a CIA plot against the Indian PM on Chinese soil. That's quite a picture.
It's an incredibly potent image, isn't it? It positions these three powers, often seen as rivals or frenemies, united against a common Western adversary. It reinforces the idea of an emerging Eurasian counterweight to U.S. influence.
And the story included a specific, very dramatic detail involving Russian President Putin, didn't it?
Yes, that was a key element that made the story so compelling and shareable. The narrative asserted that President Putin received intelligence about the imminent threat. He then supposedly delayed his own arrival in Tianjin specifically so he could intervene personally to protect Modi.
How? What did he supposedly do?
The claim was that Putin insisted, right at the last minute, that Modi not take his scheduled transport from the airport to the summit venue. Instead, Putin supposedly insisted that Modi ride with him in his own heavily armored presidential limousine, the Aura Senate.
So Putin personally ensures Modi's safety by putting him in the Russian beast.
That was the story. It painted Putin not just as an ally, but as a proactive, almost personal protector of the Indian prime minister. This detail, whether true or not, resonated powerfully, especially given the ongoing context of India-Russia relations regarding energy and defense ties, despite Western pressure over Ukraine. It portrayed Russia as a reliable friend in a dangerous world.
Okay, so joint operation, Putin's intervention. The story also pinpointed a specific location where the CIA operation was supposedly being run from, and even linked it to a real-world event, a death that actually occurred.
Yes, this is where the disinformation gets particularly sophisticated, blending fiction with a verifiable, tragic fact. The narrative claimed the CIA plot was being coordinated or controlled from a network operating out of neighboring Bangladesh.
Why Bangladesh?
Using Bangladesh taps into existing Indian anxieties about regional instability, cross-border terrorism, and the potential for foreign intelligence agencies to use neighboring countries as staging grounds for operations against India. It makes the threat feel closer, more immediate.
And the real-world death.
The story explicitly tied the foiling of the plot to the actual confirmed death of a U.S. Army Special Forces officer, Sergeant First Class Terrence Orville Jackson. SFC Jackson was sadly found deceased in his hotel room in Dhaka, Bangladesh on August 31, 2025. This was a real event reported in the news.
How did the conspiracy narrative incorporate his death?
The disinformation claimed that SFC Jackson's death was not from natural causes or suicide, as might be initially assumed. Instead, it alleged that his death, perhaps by poisoning, maybe even some exotic method like targeted radiation, the stories varied, was a direct result of the joint RA FSB MSS counter-operation, successfully neutralizing the CIA network in Dhaka that was targeting Modi.
So they turned a real soldier's death into a plot point, suggesting he was part of the foiled assassination team.
Exactly. The narrative went further, claiming that Jackson wasn't the only casualty. It alleged that the joint operation also eliminated 3 other supposed CIA contractors, and, interestingly, one Pakistani ISI agent who was allegedly collaborating with the CIA network.
Adding a Pakistani element further plays into regional dynamics and suspicions.
Absolutely. It weaves together multiple threads of Indian strategic concern. U.S. interference, instability in Bangladesh, and Pakistani collusion. By linking the plot's neutralization to a real, verifiable death in Dhaka on precisely the right date, the entire fabricated story gained a veneer of shocking credibility for those inclined to believe it. It weaponized a tragedy.
And finally, there was a comment made by Prime Minister Modi himself after returning from the trip, which proponents of the theory seized upon.
Yes. Shortly after returning to India at a public event, Modi made an off-the-cuff remark. While acknowledging applause from the audience, he quipped something to the effect of, "Are you clapping because I went to China or because I came back?"
Which, taken literally, could just be a lighthearted joke acknowledging the complexities of the India-China relationship.
It could be. But in the context of the assassination rumors already swirling online, this remark was immediately interpreted by supporters and proponents of the conspiracy theory as a veiled confirmation. They saw it not as a joke, but as a subtle, coded acknowledgement that he had faced a grave danger abroad, stared down a foreign plot, and returned safely against the odds.
Reinforcing his image as a strong leader under constant threat from powerful enemies.
Precisely. It fed directly into a pre-existing narrative, often promoted by his supporters, of Modi as an indispensable national figure courageously navigating a hostile world stage. Constantly besieged by foreign forces trying to undermine India's rise, the quip became the proof for those who wanted to believe.
Okay, we've laid out the dramatic details of this viral narrative. Now, it's absolutely crucial for us and for you listening to apply that critical lens. We need to be crystal clear about the factual basis, or lack thereof, for this entire STO summit assassination plot story. What is the consensus among credible, independent sources?
The consensus among reputable international news organizations, established fact-checking groups, and intelligence analysts who track disinformation is unequivocal. The entire story of a CIA plot against Modi at the SCO summit, foiled by a joint raw FSB-MSS operation linked to the death in Dhaka, is unsubstantiated disinformation.
Unsubstantiated,
Yeah.
meaning no credible evidence supports it.
Correct. No major international news agency, Reuters, Associated Press, AFP, BBC, CNN, New York Times, etc., nor any credible, non-aligned media outlet has found any corroborating evidence for this elaborate plot. It hasn't been confirmed by any government involved, not even implicitly. It exists almost entirely within a specific ecosystem of online publications and social media amplification.
So it's classified essentially as a manufactured narrative, a propaganda campaign.
Yes. Intelligence analysts and disinformation experts widely categorize it as such. It bears all the hallmarks of a sophisticated influence operation designed to achieve specific political or strategic objectives rather than report on a real event.
If it is indeed manufactured fiction, then the really interesting question becomes, why was this specific fiction created? Why these particular details? Why was it spread? And who benefits? We need to analyze the purpose of the disinformation.
Absolutely. Deconstructing the why is key. Each element of the story seems carefully chosen to resonate with particular audiences and serve specific strategic goals in the ongoing information war.
Let's break it down. Why base the fictional plot in Bangladesh and link it to the death in Dhaka?
Using Bangladesh achieves several things. As we touched on, it plays on real Indian security concerns about its neighborhood. It subtly implicates a neighbor, potentially straining relations or justifying closer Indian security scrutiny there. And linking it to the real death of SFC Jackson provides that crucial kernel of truth that makes the surrounding lies more believable. It anchors the fiction in reality, making it harder to dismiss outright. People hear about the death, then hear the plot story, and the two become mentally linked.
Okay, what about the involvement of Russia's FSB and China's MSS? Why invent this specific collaboration?
This is perhaps the most strategically significant element of the narrative, especially from an Indian domestic and geopolitical perspective. Portraying Russia and China as Modi's protectors against the CIA does several things simultaneously. First, it validates India's policy of strategic autonomy, suggesting it's working so well that even non-Western great powers are invested in protecting India's leader.
It makes India look important, central to global power struggle.
Exactly. Second, it bolsters nationalist sentiment. It paints a picture of India under Modi standing strong against Western pressure, backed by powerful friends. Third, it serves Russian and Chinese interests by portraying them as reliable partners and protectors, implicitly contrasting them with a supposedly treacherous interventionist United States. It subtly promotes the idea of a Eurasian bloc resisting Western hegemony.
So it works for multiple audiences.
Yeah.
Indian nationalists, Russian and Chinese state narratives.
Potentially, yes. And fourth, it directly undermines U.S. credibility and trustworthiness in India and the wider region, particularly at a time when the U.S. is actively courting India as a strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific, largely to counter China. This story drives a wedge, reminding Indians of past suspicions about the CIA, like the Shastri case, and suggesting the U.S. cannot be trusted.
And tracing the origins, where did this story primarily surface and get amplified?
The initial reports and major amplification efforts seem to have originated largely from publications and online platforms in India known for their strong nationalist stance and generally favorable coverage of the current government and its foreign policy. Outlets like Organizer, associated with the RSS, TFI, Global News, The Sunday Guardian were among those prominently reporting or analyzing the alleged plot.
Outlets that often amplify narratives emphasizing national strength, foreign threats, and the indispensability of the current leadership.
Correct. These platforms have a history of promoting narratives that align with the specific political worldview, one where India is constantly navigating external threats and requires strong, decisive leadership. The story fit perfectly within that existing framework and was readily consumed and shared by audiences receptive to that message.
So the story spreads rapidly because it taps into existing political alignments and historical anxieties. This brings us right back to our central theme, doesn't it? The Modi plot, even as disinformation, gains its power, its traction, because it resonates with that historical pattern we've been discussing.
It connects absolutely perfectly. The Modi plot is essentially the Videshi half narrative updated for the digital age. It works because the soil is already fertile. The decades of suspicion surrounding Shastri's death, the unresolved questions about Bose, the documented KMT plot against Zhu Enlai with plausible CIA links, all this history creates a pre-existing cognitive framework where the idea of a CIA plot against an Indian leader seems not just possible, but almost expected.
The distrust of the CIA, specifically fueled by the Shastri timing, provides the immediate historical justification for believing the Modi story.
Precisely. That specific historical trauma makes the audience psychologically primed to accept the narrative. The structure of the story, powerful, independent leader targeted by a shadowy foreign force, the CIA, mirrors the unresolved national anxieties from the past. It doesn't need to be proven, it just needs to feel true based on that historical pattern.
So we have these 4 cases now spanning 70 years. UN lies near miss with a real bomb in 1955, Shastri's mysterious death in Tashkent in 66, Bose's enduring disappearance myth from 45, and now Modi's fictional digital plot in 2025. If we try to synthesize this, draw a connecting thread through all of them, what does this arc teach us about power, information, and national memory, especially in the context of India and its relationship with the world?
I think it teaches us several crucial things. Firstly, in this complex world of intelligence operations, historical revisionism, and now pervasive disinformation, geopolitical truth is often incredibly difficult to nail down. It becomes probabilistic. We're forced to operate in shades of gray, assessing likelihoods rather than certainties.
Was Shastri poisoned? Did Bose really die in that crash? Was there any element of truth behind the Modi rumors, maybe a lower-level threat amplified? For the average citizen, even for historians sometimes, the answer is often, we can't be 100% sure.
Exactly. And that inherent uncertainty, often compounded by deliberate state secrecy, becomes the crucial space where these narratives thrive. It's a battleground for perception.
And the second lesson seems to be about how disinformation actually works most effectively. It's not about inventing things out of thin air.
No, the most pertinent disinformation, like the Modi plot story, works because it latches onto real, existing historical tensions, unresolved traumas, and deep-seated suspicions. It weaponizes the past. The story specifically names the CIA because that resonates with the historical anxieties surrounding Shastri and Paba. It mentions Pakistan because that taps into decades of regional rivalry. It uses Russia and China as protectors because that aligns with current geopolitical maneuvering. The fiction is built upon a foundation of real feelings and historical echoes.
The distrust is the fuel. The pride in India's independent stance is the fuel. The historical mysteries provide the template.
Precisely. And this brings us to the third critical takeaway, which loops back to Shastri and Bose particularly, the absolutely crucial role of government secrecy in keeping these narratives alive.
Weaponization of secrecy, as you called it earlier.
Undeniably. Decades of silence. The refusal to declassify the Tashkent files, the conflicting inquiries and rejection of the Mukherjee report on Bose, these actions by the state don't protect national security in the long run. What they do is guarantee the survival, the persistence, and the periodic resurgence of conspiracy theories.
Because the public logically concludes, if the government is still hiding something about events from 60 or 80 years ago, it must be something truly damning.
Yes. The secrecy validates the suspicion. It implies that the Videshi half-narrative isn't just paranoia. It might be closer to the hidden truth than the official silence admits. The only real long-term antidote to this cycle of suspicion and disinformation is transparency, even if that transparency is politically inconvenient or diplomatically awkward in the short term. Open the archives. Let historians and the public grapple with the complexities. That's the best defense against perpetual speculation.
So we've mapped this extraordinary history. Real geopolitical struggles often playing out behind these dramatic, unresolved, and sometimes entirely fictional narratives. From the very real bomb on the Kashmir Princess to the lingering questions over Tashkent and Mont Blanc, the enduring myth of Netaji's survival, right up to the manufactured crisis in Tianjin playing out on social media feeds.
And what connects them all is this powerful undercurrent. The belief, sometimes justified, sometimes manipulated, that external forces are constantly seeking to interfere in India's destiny, particularly when India asserts its independence on the world stage. These cases show how national memory doesn't just fade, it actively shapes how current events are perceived and interpreted. The unresolved mysteries of the past provide the vocabulary for understanding the threats of the present.
So what does this all mean for you, listening to this? It means that in this global arena, this great game of nations, information true, false, or somewhere in between, isn't just a byproduct of events. It is the battlefield. It is the weapon. And the most effective informational weapons are often those forged in the fires of past traumas, targeting the unquiet ghosts of history.
The pattern seems quite clear. These aren't just isolated historical anecdotes or quirky conspiracy theories. They represent a structural element of how India engages with the world, how its public processes geopolitical risk, and how its past continues to inform its present strategic culture.
Which leads us to a final, provocative thought for you to consider. We understand now that the alleged 2025 CIA plot against Prime Minister Modi is almost certainly manufactured disinformation. But the very fact that this story could gain such traction, that it felt plausible to so many, precisely because it echoed the circumstances and suspicions surrounding Lal Bahadur Shastri's death 60 years earlier, well, raises a fundamental question.
Is India, because of its unique history, its geopolitical position, and critically, the persistent opacity surrounding key historical events, destined to continuously experience its major strategic challenges, not primarily through the lens of open diplomacy or verifiable facts, but through this recurring, dramatic prism of conspiracy and the suspected foreign hand?
Will the ghost of the Cold War, the unanswered questions of Tashkent and Taihoku, continue to dictate the terms of engagement as long as the official truth remains locked away in classified files?
It really highlights the challenge of constructing a shared national reality, a trusted narrative, when the foundational archives remain closed and historical memory is contested territory.
A deeply complex thought indeed. Something to really mull over. Thank you for joining us on this very deep dive into a century of intrigue, information warfare, and India's unquiet historical mysteries.
It's been fascinating to explore. Always a pleasure.